Get your running shoes ready today. We got a special show coming up on the LOCO Sports Forum. Sherm Chester with you on this edition, a special edition of the LOCO Sports Forum. Running, I guess, synonymous with spring and the Boston Marathon here in New England. And Bob Glowacky, our producer, and yours truly, were trying to kick around an idea for a show about running because, well, first off, it was one of our more successful podcast and video casts that we do with the show. So I said, hey, let's give back our guest that we had last time, and we have another special guest this time to discuss the art of running. Steve Burris, who has a background both as a runner, a coach, a developer. As I guess that we'll get into that later, and also a friend that it's a reunion of sorts because we went to grade school together, we went to high school together, and I've lost track, I have to admit, over the years, but now he's a businessman who runs a sport related to running, and that's Mike St. Laurent. Mike St. Laurent, the CEO of LOCO Sports. Welcome to the LOCO Sports Forum. Steve, welcome. And Bob Glowacky, our producer, the man behind the curtain. He'll be joining us today. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be back.
Thanks, sure.
And Bob's got to be behind the scenes, but he'll be joining us. He promises me today. He will be joining us today. Well, again, running, this is the season. You two gentlemen have a background working together as coaches. So let's first off, before we go there, what stimulated your interest in running? And we'll start with our special guest today, Mike St. Laurent.
Yeah, well, I firmly remember the day I was sitting as a freshman in high school at Exeter High, and I was thinking of going off of soccer. I knew it was way too small, too slow to go off of football. And they said, boys cross country. And I said, well, that sounds pretty neat. So I went out that day with my cutoff shorts and my kids' shoes and proceeded to run 5 miles with the seniors on the team up and over Kimball Hill. And I couldn't walk the next day, but that was my first introduction to running.
Wow. And Steve, what about you?
Well, I'm a child of the 60s, and I clearly remember when I was a freshman in high school, which at the time was at the junior high in Concord. And I was in the car with my dad in the evening, and he was asking what I was going to do when I got to high school. And I said, I don't know. I wasn't really good in any sports or anything. And I was into flying. My dad was a pilot, but, there was nothing in high school to do with that. And I said, well, I'm not big enough to be a football player. And then my dad was telling me about this runner from Concord High by the name of Roger Maxfield. And this was back in the early 60s. And he was the New England champion 2 years in a row. And my dad happened to be reading the paper, the Concord Monitor at the time. And he showed me some clippings later when we got home of Roger Maxfield. And it was all about cross country and accolades to his coach, Bill Ludi, who I think anyone who ran back in that area would know is one of the greatest coaches ever. Not only in New Hampshire, but New England and probably across the country. So I decided, I walked into the locker room the first day of school in my sophomore year, because freshmen couldn't run at that time. And I met Coach Ludi, and he fixed me up with some running clothes. And I had my old PF Flyers or Converse shoes. I can't remember what they were. They weren't really running shoes. And at that time, we were running at a place called White's Park in Concord, and we would run around the pond. And he said, all I want you to do is jog and walk, jog and walk. And I pretty much walked, but, he had upwards of 55 or 60 kids on the team at that time. This is the early 60s. There was no soccer. There was only football as competition. So I was near the back most of the time, and sort of gradually worked my way up and finally found a sport that I liked and that was exciting and that I could do a little bit. And that, long story short, I ran for 52 years. and counting, because I'm sort of back to running after
Right.
being out of it for a while with a bum leg. So here we are. So it's a great sport, and of course I got into the coaching end as well. And Mike and I hooked up and perpetrated various deeds along the way, and had a lot of fun.
I want to get into that, but before we do, let's get the young whipper in the crowd here. Bob Glowacky, our producer, how did you get into running? What stimulated you to get into track and just
I
run?
think I started running in 8th grade. I think they were, or 7th grade in middle school, right there in Stratham or Exeter. And I think my mom probably put me on the team because I had way too much energy. So it was probably a way for me to kind of get that energy out. And I didn't really like any other sports at the time, and that kind of started it all. And freshman and sophomore years, I tried running with all the older, faster runners, and eventually, got to be the captain senior year all season. So it was pretty fun, and got to keep a 4x800 meter record. So that's a plus too. So hopefully it'll come down soon with some better teams. But Exeter's always produced a lot of really good runners, so it's nice to be a part of that tradition.
Oh, that's excellent. Excellent. Well, let's go to coaching before we'll get into your business, Mike, but I want to, you and Steve coached at Exeter High. Give us a little background on what you guys did and the success you guys had.
Yeah, well, it started.
Go ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
Yeah, it started first with Steve was coaching the junior high team. And I don't remember who was coaching the high school team, but basically I decided that it was a good idea to come over and run with the kids that were on the high school team. And there was a great group of young men that we all grew to love and appreciate as athletes and as good people. And when I was going to college, I felt that it was a lot more fun to run with the boys on the Exeter High cross country team than it was to run with the guys at UNH. They'd kill you in a workout. So I got to be top dog and run against these high school kids. And Steve and I made quite a team. We took the kids, from 6th grade all the way up to their senior year, and I'm still friends with some of them. And it truly was some of the best time in my life to be coaching and appreciating. And I was pretty young. So both Steve and I were pretty young at that time. So, if you could run, under a 5-minute mile or something like that, you were pretty good back then. And we were able to get all the kids together running as a really good team. I forget how many kids we had on the team, probably 40 or so. It was a lot of young people. But Steve can fill you in more on some more of the coaching things. He was the official coach.
Well, I think it was 1973 or 4. I was working at the radio station WKXR at that time, which Sherm, you're familiar with.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And one of my coffee chat guests was a guy named Dave Jenkins, who was the track and cross country coach at Exeter High. And he really developed a great program, brought a lot of young kids along. So I asked him if I could come to a meet, and he said, sure, come on, you can help us officiate. Well, one of the runners there was a guy named Mike St. Laurent, by the way. That was when he was still in high school. So I got to going to the cross country meets and just helping out. And as things progressed and Dave went on to other things, I somehow got in line to be a coach. And I can't remember exactly what year that was, but it was the mid 70s. And I started out as an assistant coach and gradually took over the cross country program. And I remained an assistant coach in track until the early 80s. So as Mike said, he came along at some point, can't remember which year it was, but I already had known Mike, and we sort of built the teams together and used to have this great adventure every summer up in Mount Elmore, Vermont, where we took kids up to a training camp and probably got away with a lot of things that you couldn't get away with these days, like taking a bunch of kids in the back of a pickup truck and staying in a cabin with no running water and no bathrooms and no heat. But we had a great time, and the kids ran up there, and we had some pretty good teams. We won the state Class I meet. I think it was in 79. And I believe we're the last Exeter cross country team to win a state title. I can't swear to that. And I know there have been a lot of good teams and certainly a lot of great track runners. But I believe that was the last time that Exeter won a state title in cross country. So, and, kudos to Mike. And we had a lot of other sort of volunteer coaches at that time. Rick McKeon was one, Nick Greco. We just all loved running and loved working with the kids. And as Mike said, we're still friends with a lot of them.
Now that championship team, what were some of the standouts on that team? Do you remember any of the names of the kids?
Yeah, one was a guy named Joe Ayotte who happens to live in Concord now, and he's actually heads up the city's cross country ski program. So, and he's got a family now, and another guy, Butch Whitehouse, who still lives in Brentwood and still runs. There was a whole lot of them. Mark Ranlett, Russ Prescott, who's a state senator. He was one of our runners. I hate to leave anybody out because the list.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
But I'm sure Mike could remember. I remember all of them. I still have all the posters with their pictures on them, and whenever I see some of them, I try to give some of them away. But it was a great group of kids.
Mike, do you have any memories of any of those guys?
Yeah, I remember we were at the state meet, and Steve and I were shaking our head because there was this young man, Pedro Catinci. Pedro was this young Puerto Rican descent, I believe. And Pedro tears would come down his eyes and his face would scrunch up. And Steve would look at me and says, if there was a brick wall in the way, Pedro would run right through it. And, and that's the way all of our guys were. There was also a young man I'm so good friends with, runs in the Exeter Running Club, Mike Hodgins, who started as a sixth grader and was the last kid on the team, probably the biggest, fattest kid on the team. And he worked his tail end off. So by the time he was a senior, he was in the top 7 on the team. And he was so proud of his accomplishments. He just thinks of that today as one of his, his biggest accomplishments of his whole life, of becoming a runner when nobody expected him to.
There you go. Now you moved on to UNH, and how were your days on the UNH team?
Yeah, I was on the UNH team 3 years on the cross country team, and the coach there told me I just wasn't fast enough to be on the winter track team or the spring track team. Instead of being accommodating and trying to make me faster, he just says, "Well, you're not fast enough, Mike. Don't even bother trying out." But he was the coach there was a hurdler, and so he decided he would take every single workout that George Reed can do, who was an All-American, about 9 minutes to the mile, and give those workouts to everybody else. So instead of having all these healthy runners, every meet I would go down from the 15th man to the 10th man, the 12th man to the 6th or 7th man. And that's how it was every season. And every season I got my letter and the coach would say, "You're not my 7th man." I say, "Well, coach, yeah, I am." So I ran at UNH, but the reason I didn't do winter and spring track, it just decided it's a better idea to train for the Boston Marathon. So it was fortuitous for me that I didn't run on the team, because then I never would have got a chance to start running marathons.
One thing you never want to say to Mike is you're not fast enough, because he'll set out to prove you wrong, even at the expense of running himself into the ground, literally, because Mike became pretty famous for some hot weather races that got to him at the end. And most of them he managed to bash through that barrier, but a couple of them, so I recall we had to carry him away, or he was carried away in a stretcher or an ambulance or something. But, Mike would just put his head down and compete not only against himself and the other runners, but whatever the elements were as well. He was a tough guy.
I think that's the thing about running, is that your personal best is what's really in your head. I would think, you want to try to do a little bit better than you did the last time, or if you set a goal for a time, that's what you're aiming for. So when it comes to coaching, both of you, I guess, could throw in on this, and Bob, anything you can think of. What are good coaching techniques to? Obviously, Mike, you said the coach at UNH was like, you can't do it this way or the highway. What are good coaching techniques that you guys come up with or like to see taught?
Well, one of the biggest things to me is, regardless of ability, it's a funny thing, I happen to be back coaching middle school now, which is another story. But one of the most important points I try to impress on kids is that your main competitor is yourself, or that little man, or in the case of a woman, that little woman inside you that's always telling you to slow down, that's telling you can't do it. That's your main competitor. whether you finish first or last or in the middle, only one person can finish first in the race. So, everybody's important on the team. There's lots of ways of winning and running. If you improve your time, you're a winner. If you run your first race without walking, you're a winner. If you ran a hill that you could never run before, you're a winner. If you improve your spot on the team, you're a winner. So that's a great thing about running. And Exeter was always just a great place for running. The community was supportive. Of course, we had the Nike influence and the Jeff Johnson girls team influence, and just great places to run. Mike mentioned Kimball Hill, great road courses, great forest courses, the Academy Trails, of course, Fort Rock, as we called it at that time. So, I mean, that was the big thing to me. Winning, my coach once said when I was in high school, a winning is not the sole intent of a good program, but it's the result of a good program. So if you concentrate on all those other details and help every kid be as good as he can be or she, then, the winning will sort of take care of itself. So I guess that kind of sums up my coaching philosophy, which.
What about you, Mike? What about you?
Yeah, I think the unique thing about running is, and I ended up coaching at Newmarket High, the winter track and spring track program, for a good number of years, because I wanted my kids to have a good coach, to be honest. And one of the things I always had to educate parents about was you go to these track meets and it said, we cheer for everybody. You could be being lapped in the mile run, and it's like, instead of saying, God, that kid stinks, you see him, he's trying as hard as they can. And the feeling of the team, and it's just so rewarding and accommodating to every single level of person, every single type of person. It makes for a completely different team atmosphere. And that carries over to adult running as well. I've been to lots of road races where you get to the end and people are clapping for, like crazy for the last person coming in, because everybody appreciates and understands the diligence and the suffering and how hard it is to get to that point. If you're going to finish a half marathon, you've never done one before, and you lost 40 pounds. It's like going, that's significantly harder than some of us that are still fit. They're saying, oh, it's easy for me, I can just go around a half marathon. Or other people say, man, that is so hard to do that. It's one of these sports that has the individual accomplishment, no matter what it is, applauded by everyone. And that's like a lesson in life that you're not going to learn. You rarely learn in other sports.
And Bob, now again, you're the younger guy here, but what in coaching, what were you looking for? A coach obviously is supportive, but I mean, what are there techniques that they help you with?
I definitely think with distance running in particular, at least in my experience, the teams, like they had mentioned, everybody's kind of different levels. So you got some really fast people, some slower people, and everything in between. So it's the coach's ability to kind of come up with workouts that fit to your ability and that will push you. My coach, Scazzatelli, was big on like VO2 max and all these things, which I've completely forgotten about now. But, we did a lot of work in the beginning of the season to, see where you should be working out and coming up with fun workouts that kind of change it up and push you. But I think what worked more for me is less the coaching and more that team environment is really important with running. When I went to Iona, which is one of the best running schools in the college level, we have national champions and from all over Europe and Kenya and stuff like that. And we would all run together for the first 2 miles of that Sunday long run. Then they're going off at their 5-minute pace for 17 miles and I'm chugging along at, 6.5 or 7. But we all work together and, push each other. And like they had mentioned, even people on other teams in high school, I remember, Blue Hawk, Winnicott Warrior rivalries, but I would go and run with the best kid on the Winnicott's team, and we'd go run at the beach together. I'd park my car at Odiorn, he'd park his car at Hampton Beach, and we'd help each other out and go running together. And because like I said, it's sure in one small race you might win or lose based on those other people around you, but in cross country, it's unless you're at the very top, you're running with everybody and against yourself, not really against other people. So that's kind of what I liked about it.
So that was your philosophical take on how you got where you were in running. Okay, that's great. That's great. Now that's what I keep saying to everybody, that it's probably the only sport where you're competing against yourself, or you're just trying to take care of what you're doing. Frustrating sports like, to me, golf. Yeah, I gave that
Good walk spoiled.
Yeah, I exactly. I gave that up a long time ago. I said, why should I get so frustrated? I can walk the course and have a better time. Now, you gentlemen, Mike and Steve, beside coaching together, you also have a history with Nike. I don't know, Steve, why don't you get us running on that one, so to speak?
Well, I mentioned earlier some of the great influences around Exeter for the running community. I neglected to mention the academy people, because they were great as well, the coaches at that time. And Mike and I knew a lot of the runners as well. And not to mention being able to run in their trails. But also I somehow, through coaching, met a gentleman named Jeff Johnson, who came to Exeter and started the first girls cross country program. And they were state champions for many, many years consecutively. The other thing that Jeff did is he was actually the very first employee of Nike. And he was sent by the founder of Nike, Phil Knight, to find a shoe factory. And where he found it was in Exeter at the old Y Shoe Company. And that's where Nike had their first R&D facility. Back in about, I think, 1975, they started. Well, through my association with Jeff, me coaching the boys, him coaching the girls, we got to talking about shoes, and he would test shoes with our team. And one day he just offered me a job. I said, well, what would I be doing? He said, well, you'd be helping us develop shoes. And I said, well, I don't know that much about shoes. And he said, well, yes, you do. You've been testing shoes. You've given us some good feedback. And so at the end of 1976, I believe, in January 77, I sort of left my ambitions to be a teacher and joined Nike. And at that time, I was able to continue the coaching, which was great. And so I worked in Exeter from 77 to 80, at which point a lot of the business started migrating overseas. So that sort of launched me into my tour of the world, I guess, and 42 years in the shoe business, doing everything from developing shoes. And I like to say I was a designer back when it was a primitive art, because the art of shoe design is now a science, very technical, very CAD related. People much more creative and much more skilled than I do the designing. So I got into the production side and ended up managing factories in various locations around the world, all through my love of running and the fact that I coached. And I was recently in an interview with Jeff up in his place up in Lebanon for the 50th anniversary of Nike. And I commenced to start thanking Jeff for all he did for me, getting me into the sports industry and so forth. He goes, it's all random. Hey, you're at the radio station, you happen to show up at a cross country meet, you happen to meet me, you happen to test some shoes. It's all random. But, you don't have to thank me. I said, well, I thank you anyway. So.
Yeah, so I got to know Jeff through, I helped Steve coach the boys team, and Jeff coached the girls team. And when I graduated from college, I applied to work at Nike. Well, Nike grew considerably from 1976 to 1980. It was a big company then. And they were hiring mostly either high school teachers, where Steve came from, or they were hiring elite athletes that were world record holders. And me, being the seventh man on the UNH team, didn't really cut it. So I got my first job at Nike as a gopher, basically as somebody that went and helped people make shoes by people in the sample room, grabbing the materials, grabbing the dyes, and watching the people actually make the shoes and carting all the stuff around, and then taking this crafted shoe and running upstairs with it to Steve and other people. It's like, here's your sample, and running back downstairs and finding the next shoe that was to be made. So I know I learned a lot about exactly how shoes are made, because I was watching every single step that they're doing and paying careful attention. And I was sitting in a room with a shoe dog, is what we call people back to Joe Murphy, who knew everything about making shoes. And whenever he had something very interesting to make, Joe Murphy would make a really cool shoe for an elite world record holder, either discus thrower or shot put thrower or racer or something like that. So I was able to learn a lot, and then eventually got offered a job to do development, just like Steve did. But I ended up doing development overseas in Busan, South Korea.
Because we were all gophers back then. It was a gopher industry, It was hands-on, literally crafting shoes together. I'd go home every day with EVA dust all over me from grinding midsoles and wondering what I was breathing in with all that shoe cement all day. But it was fun. I can still remember that smell of what a shoe factory smelled like, because we made a lot of shoes in Exeter, made a lot of shoes up in Saco, Maine. At one time we had 2 factories in Exeter, both on Front Street and down on Chestnut Street, I believe it was. So it was a great time. And it's like I said, Nike just turned 50, and I think when I joined they were about a $12 million company, and what are they now, like 30 billion, something like that. I think I always say, I left Nike some years ago. I always say, well, they managed to somehow get along without me. Like they're just a machine, so.
You two guys were on the creative edge of a company, and let's stay there. There's a story I want to tell. I'll do it at the end of the program about a show that's been on HBO, and it has a tie into Nike, a story about Nike, but I'll wait for the end for that. I want to stay on the gear. As far as you two, and Bob, your input, please. Gear. I showed at the beginning of the program a pair of what I use for, I don't run, but just heavy duty running type shoes. What as runners, what do you guys look for? What do you need? And tell folks that are thinking about running, young people especially, how they should go about doing it and doing it right. Steve, you want to start us off?
Yeah. Well, it's funny, since I left the industry, I'm a consumer of shoes now. For years, I had free shoes, partly because I was in the business and partly because I was a perfect size 9, or so I was told by some of our foot morphologists. Well, as I got older, my foot swelled to a size 10, and I'm also not in the business anymore. So I have to select my own running shoes. And so I've tried just about every brand. And what I end up telling people is, there's a lot of good brands out there. Some of them are actually made in the same factories and the same materials. They all have similar technologies. Some of the technology is sort of a marketing hype. Some of it's really genuine. But the best thing you can do, the best shoe for you is the one that fits you and the one that you're comfortable in. Whatever the brand, Nike has a certain type of fit. New Balance has a certain type of fit. Brooks, Saucony, whatever the brand. Some of the new ones, the new brands that are out there, and there have been quite a few. Altra is one. I'm trying to remember the one with the big thick midsole. But anyway, so that's you got to have comfortable shoes. You got to have shoes with the right cushioning for you. And some runners require more cushioning than others. I happen to like a well-cushioned shoe. Some runners like a more minimalist shoe with less heel lift and less cushioning. So you really got to analyze your needs. It helps to have somebody at retail help you select a shoe as well. But at the end of the day, there's just so many good options, almost too many sometimes. It gets confusing. So obviously, as a runner, the most important equipment you have are your shoes. And of course, you need good running shorts and warm-up suits and all that stuff. But the shoe is the main thing. And
what about you, Mike? I mean, what are you looking for in gear, especially the running shoes?
Yeah, for me, I have a similar thing with Steve. I had free shoes for so many years, and I was only a size 7.5 or 8. So when they made a mistake, made the shoes too small, I ended up with them, which actually happened in one case. There was the first time, that molded midsole that they make is called EVA. Well, the first time they ever molded that, they didn't realize that it shrunk in the mold. So the first molded EVA shoe made out of the stuff that Nike coined the term Phylon was a shoe that they made, and it was a size 8. And since I was a 7.5 or 8, I was the first one to run in a molded EVA running shoe. It was a Terra TC prototype. But anyway, I always look for things that are just neutral and flexible that really fit my foot. And Steve got it right on the head on the nail there is, whatever fits your foot best is first the brand that you need to look at. And the second thing you need to look at is not only the brand, but then do you need support, or do you need just regular cushion? And a lot of people sometimes get too much shoe. They get shoe that's kind of confines their foot so it doesn't pronate too much. A certain amount of pronation or supination is natural in your running gait. And basically something that's, light and flexible and neutral for me is what I look for. And the other issue that you try to look for is some brands change their models every 6 months. They take the same shoe that you love and then it changes on you. I try to go with some of the models that stay in line a little bit longer. So I get 2 or 3 pair. I know that they fit and they work. I buy 1 pair and I rush out and buy 2 more pair. So then I'm good for a couple of years because they last for a while. So that's one of the issues that you have with shoes nowadays. They change so rapidly that you finally something that works really good for you. You have to protect your investment by going out and buying a few extra pair.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's my whether
Yeah.
it's shoes, cars, anything. I mean, if you get a good model, hey, hang with it, you know. Bob, what about you? When you're running, what do you look for?
I mean, similar. I got free shoes when I owned a cross country and track team. We were sponsored by Brooks at the time. So I think a lot of athletes in general, not just runners, are, creatures of habit. So I still wear the same running shoes that I got for free. And I probably will keep doing it. And they haven't changed that much. I didn't like that from high school to the time I was in college. To me, shoes got a lot softer, bigger foam, and all this kind of trends, and now it's coming full circle. So stuff changes. In high school, it was all about Nike was the thing. Everyone wanted Nike, and especially for flats, for spikes and stuff like that. Everyone had the Nike victories if you ran distance. If you didn't have Nike victories, like it didn't matter if you were the fastest person. Everyone was like looking at each other's shoelace colors and what kind of nice flats people had at the race. And as a high schooler, you want flashy shoes and all that. So there were some nice stuff out there. But when you look at the elite runners, I think maybe if you ask them personally, maybe they'll tell you, or they'll concede they have a certain favorite brand, but they'll wear whatever their sponsor is going to put on them, and it's not really going to affect their race speed too much, I think. So it's, unless it's some no name brand or something like that, but people get sponsored by different teams. And now Iona's track team, I think the whole school was sponsored by Adidas, and I don't think it's affecting the performance, them switching from Brooks to Adidas. They're still doing the same workouts, the same outcomes. And what that tells you is, if the elite runners don't really need a certain brand, I don't think you do either. Like they said, find what shoe fits you best, and if it fits you and you like the color, that's a plus too, I guess.
But it's amazing. It's amazing what's happened to the industry. Some of the companies got so big, like Nike, Adidas, for example. Brooks is over $1 billion now, and New Balance. And every year I keep saying, well, there's not much room for new brands, but new brands keep coming along. It's the Hoka was one that came out of nowhere, and Altra is another one. Topo. There's just so many brands out there, and they all have a different story to tell. And some of their logic is very authentic. The other thing is, most of these companies are people that you kind of, if you've been in the industry, they've come from some of the other companies. They just kind of move around and get enough ambition and enough financial backing to start their own company. So it's just an industry that keeps morphing, and just when you think it can't get any bigger, it just keeps getting bigger, because running, they used to say like 70% of running shoes are never running. They're comfort shoes, or sometimes people call them barbecue shoes, because people like the look of a running shoe, or they like the comfort of it. But it's a massive industry. I can't believe what's happened. I mean, I wouldn't feel comfortable in it today, but it's just too big. It's become less, honestly, it's become less about product, more about marketing, and of course, advertising. Not to say the shoes aren't good, because as I said, there's just so many good shoes out there.
Well, one thing you'll appreciate, you and Mike, HBO is a series. They just finished it up. It was about the LA Lakers, and primarily about Magic Johnson. And one of the scenes, and I went back and did a little fact checking. There is questions whether it actually happened or not, but supposedly Phil Knight, when they were trying to sign Magic Johnson to a sneaker contract, everybody was out trying to get his name on the dotted line. Phil Knight met him and said, "Gee, I can't offer you a lot of money, but I can offer you some shares." And at that point, Nike was a penny stock. And he turned him down. He went under pressure with Converse, because Converse at the time had Larry Bird, and that was part of that Bird Magic thing that was going on, the rivalry. And eventually Magic left Converse, and I don't remember who he went with, but it wasn't Nike. But the bottom line of the story was, if he had taken that deal with Phil Knight, and granted, he is a multimillionaire, maybe a billionaire, he would have been a billionaire just on that stock alone.
Yeah. Well, my throat kind of tightens up when you start talking about stock. I won't get into the details, but I had a certain number of shares of stock many, many years ago. And I think it was $9 at the time. And it doubled to 18. I said, wow, I did really well. So I sold it. And since then, it's split umpteen numbers of times, and in addition to going up to anyway. So don't come to me for financial advice, as they say. But you're right. It would have been a great investment.
Mike, I want to talk about your business. You got a business called LOCO Sports, and you do what they call LOCO races. Explain the business and the races to us, please.
Well, actually, I have to confess, it didn't start as a race business. It started as a shoe business.
Oh, okay.
And our first 5 years, we were actually called LOCO, and we made shoes. We had 5 different models. We had the Perfecto, the Mojo, the Espresso, and the Bandito. And people love these shoes. And what our claim to fame is, Steve was talking about that before Hoka came out and stuff, is that we'd keep the shoe the exact same way for 5 years. So you bought a shoe and you really liked it, you could just count on the shoe being around for 5 years, and you get to run it, not worry about changing. Well, it was good in theory, but basically when we went overseas to make our shoes, our orders were so small. They were like 2,000 or 3,000 pair at a time, which sounds like a lot, but that's teeny for a factory. The factory's kind of kicking us out of the factory to a different factory. And so every time we changed factory, we would change the fit of the shoe or how the shoe worked. So it didn't really work that well. So one day I had the bright idea that I loved half marathons, and I loved our little town. We lived in Newmarket, New Hampshire, and the loop around Great Bay and Bay Road says, let's hold a half marathon to promote our shoes. So we did some advertising on this site called Cool Running, and lo and behold, we got like 1,670 people to sign up for a half marathon in Newmarket. And there was only 2 or 3 people in the company, and we put on this huge race. I remember getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning to drive out and put all the water stops up and the signs up and everything. And we weren't ready for all the traffic. We blocked off the entire town and stuff like that. I said, oh my God, what have we done? Well, at the end of the day, about 3 days later, he says, wow, we made more money on that race than we did on selling shoes all year. So I decided at that point that we would decide and just do one in the fall and one in the spring. So we had a Great Bay Half Marathon, which the Exeter Hospital helped sponsor. Thank you very much. And then we had the Hampton Half Marathon in Hampton. And then I got the bright idea that we'd do a couple in the fall and a couple in the spring. Well, we ended up over the past like 15, 17 years, we've had like 250,000 runners in our races, and we put on about 180 races, anywhere from 5K races all the way up to a 100-mile relay that's coming up this August in Vermont.
Oh, wow. So now if people want to find out where these races are, you have a website. Would you give us the place to go? Yeah,
locoraces.com. We'll link you to it. Since then, we've merged with another company called Ventures Endurance. It's a much bigger company, but still the LOCO races are part of the Ventures Endurance portfolio now.
Okay. And again, this is for anybody. I mean, you don't have to be a pro runner. I mean, you could just be out there trying to prove something to yourself, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. All the races nowadays, it used to be the races were 90% serious people. You know, if you went to a race and you ran slower than a 7-minute pace, you were at the back of the pack. And nowadays, it's completely flip-flop. There's 5 or 10% of people that are serious about their running and their times. Another 80 to 90%, they enjoy themselves. They might not even call themselves a runner. They'll call themselves a jogger or a run occasionally. They're there to have a good time and to run on a nice course and have fun with their friends. And they've done all the work to get there, but they're not as serious about it as the first 5 or 10%, age group winners and things like that. So every race now is kind of a celebration of fitness with a race thrown in it on top, is how I kind of put it.
Excellent. And Bob, you were telling me that you've done business with LOCO, right? With some of the shoes?
I think I still have a pair of Banditos in my childhood closet somewhere in the box of shoes that I'll never wear again, but I, have memories of them. My first, flat that I had, my first, spikes, and They probably smell like I just raced in them. Their, memories are mementos, and it was really cool having, wearing a shoe that, hey, this was, from right here, rather than, kind of that local pride that I think a lot of runners just have about their communities. But it was cool to, be able to wear a local shoe. And
I had a
I'll tell you
feeling
from experience, hold on to old shoes. You never know.
Yeah, true. Good point.
You never know.
I had a
They
feel. I
become
had a
collector's
feeling.
items.
I had a feeling Bob was a Bandito type of guy. Now, we were kicking around at the beginning of the show about the Boston Marathon. That was kind of the impetus for doing a running show again. Mike, you have run the marathon several times, and talk about that, the prep for it. What you said it started a long time ago. So,
Yeah.
Sure.
So I was working at Indian Head Bank in Exeter, New Hampshire, and I was good friends with Dave Jenkins, who coached with Steve. And I got out of high school in '73. I got my degree. I didn't know what I'd do with my life. And for that year, I just rode my bicycle and drank too much and partied. And hey, I'm out of school. I can have a good time. And Dave Jenkins kept on saying, "You should start running again, Mike. The road races are fun." I go, no, I'm not going to do that. So Dave Jenkins invited me to come down and watch him. He was running the Boston Marathon. He was going to try to break 3 hours. So I drove down there, and I got to the bottom of Heartbreak Hill. And I'm standing there watching, and this guy with his T-shirt with Boston written across the front of it, with floppy hair and a loose arm, come running by, and he's in the lead, and it's Bill Rogers. And I go, this is just like a regular guy. And he stopped just before where I was, tied his shoe, nonchalant, looked around, started up again, running 5-minute pace. And I was there when Bill ran his first Boston Marathon. I said, oh my God, he came out of nowhere. I could win the Boston Marathon. So I started running the next day, so I got my together basically. It says, I'm going to be a runner. I'm going to try to qualify for Boston. So a couple of years later, I went back to school. A year later, I went back to school at UNH. I talked them into letting me in, and surprised that they let me in. And I trained for Boston with a friend of mine at UNH. And to get there, you had to qualify for Boston. So there was this race called the Silver Lake Dodge Marathon. It started in Hopkinton, exactly the Boston Marathon started, not the one we know now, but the one on Hayden Row, the earlier one. It went all the way down, and it was in January, went all the way down to the Boston Marathon course, the top of Heartbreak Hill, turned around and came back and finished at Silver Lake Dodge. It was January, we're standing there on the starting line, looking around. There's a few fast runners, Vinnie Fleming and Bob Hodge, who were top 5 Boston Marathon runners, and it started to snow. So we're running down the road, and it started snowing so bad you couldn't see the person in front of you. We're just running and running and running. Couldn't see the mile markers. You couldn't see anything. So got the top of Heartbreak Hill, and I'm running in Tiger Bostons, no traction. I've got Sears cotton sweats on. I've got a hat pulled over. I've got my hands in my sleeves. I'm frozen. So I get the top of Heartbreak Hill, and I'm still on 7-minute pace, and I finally finish at Silver Lake Dodge, and I ran 3:02:23. I didn't qualify for Boston, all that work. I waited and waited with my friend to get my ride home, and it was supposed to be another college kid. He never showed up. So we thumbed back from Boston and in our sweats still, all the way back to UNH, made it home at midnight. Well, I didn't qualify for Boston, but the next weekend I drove down to the Boston TD Garden, and I went in the bowels of it, and I looked around. I finally found Jacques Semple, who actually did sports massage for the Celtics. And you see those pictures of those guys in this big stainless steel tub. So one of the Celtics was in the tub. I say it's John Havlicek. I don't know who it was, to be honest. And he's giving this guy a massage. So I say, John, I ran that marathon last week. Snowstorm. He says, I ran 3:02. I didn't qualify. And he says, anyone that can run that blast of snowstorm can run in my race. And he scribbled something on his wet hand. And I got into the Boston Marathon. It was like $4 to enter or something like that. Ridiculous.
Wow.
So this was like 6 weeks. I had 6 weeks to recover and start training for Boston. So that year, there's probably 3,000 people in the Boston Marathon. You could drive to Hopkinton. You could park near the high school in the streets. You walk to the high school. You go in there. You see Bill Rogers running around. You go get your paper number. And you walk around and you run just like, like a regular road race, except there's helicopters and lots of police. So I ended up running my first Boston Marathon. I did break 3 hours. I did 2:53 for my first Boston Marathon. But That was my
Wow.
fun story of the day.
But was Johnny Kelly the legend there in that one too? The
Oh,
old
I'm
time?
sure he was. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm sure
I
he
mean, yeah,
was. I
he
haven't
ran
looked at,
just all of
yeah.
them.
But the
Steve,
funny thing is, in the Silver Lake Dodge Marathon that I ran, right in
Mhm.
front of me was Dave McGilvery, Boston race director. He
Oh, there
just broke 3 hours, and he tells a story in his book about how he's always run the Boston Marathon. Even he directs it and runs it at night because of his grandpa. He promised his grandpa that he would run it. Dave McGilvery finished right in front of me at the Boston Marathon as well. So one place in front of you, you can look in the results. So it was Dave and
cool.
I, hooked and destined to run together, I guess.
Now, Steve, did you ever run the marathon?
Yeah, I've run Boston twice.
Okay.
I think the first time was like 89, and I managed to qualify. I can't remember what the qualifying time was because I was over 30 at the time, or maybe it was over 40. I don't know. But anyway, I was really serious about it. I said, well, I know I know I can run like between 250 and 255, something like that. And I trained hard, did all my long runs. I can remember running at the dead of night in Exeter, after work and did everything right. So I was running pretty comfortably for the first 15 or so, which is very deceiving because there's a lot of downhill. And then somebody handed me a piano to carry the rest of the way. And, I wanted to drop out in the worst way, but my whole family had come down and get a hotel room at the Westin in Boston to see me finish and all that. So I finally finished, but it was like a death march, but I had a certain sense of satisfaction that I did it. So the next time I ran was, I was actually living in Germany at the time, working for Adidas, who became the official sponsor of the marathon. And I didn't qualify, but because I was working for the sponsor company, I got a number. And I said, I'm just going to do it on a lark. I'm not going to get serious about it. I train, pretty well, although I was older and I couldn't really run every day. I couldn't do the really long runs. And because my attitude was different, I said, I just want to finish. I want to enjoy the experience. I want to be able to talk to the other runners. I ran really well. I ran better than I did when I tried to do it seriously. So it was a great experience that time. But just the feel of the Boston Marathon and the camaraderie of the runners, and the fact that it's broadcast live on TV, and the mystique and the legend of the marathon. It's just really great to be a part of that, even though
Guys can say you
obviously
did
I
it.
wasn't one of the elite runners.
But you guys can say you did it. I mean, that
Yeah.
is an accomplishment in life. Now, Bob, you haven't run it, have you?
Yeah, I haven't. The longest run I did was about 17 or 18 miles because I got lost in Rockefeller State Park in Westchester on a training run, and I luckily saw someone from my team and tried to catch up and looked at my watch, and I did 6 more miles than I planned to that day. But
You're still a young guy. There's time for you to get into the marathon.
I was gonna say, I looked it up on the results, and I guess there were 4 finishers from Exeter this year. Stephanie Bramlett finished in I think 3:25. Robert Lafreniere finished in 3:45. Lindsay Close finished in 4:02, and then Zoe Spearman finished in 4:11. So
Excellent.
some good runners right there from Exeter.
Yeah,
Yeah,
kudos to
Boston
all of them. Kudos
yeah.
to all of them. Because I got to tell you, I mean, from my point of view, I mean, I love running, but a marathon ain't fun. It's satisfying and it's a sense of accomplishment, but I can't honestly say it's fun. Maybe if you're really built for it, as some runners are. I mean, some runners just have a natural gait and a way of running that's efficiently, that's good for them. So I sometimes advise runners, well, if you're a runner and you don't take on a marathon, just point to a half marathon. Half marathon is just as satisfying, honestly, and you don't tear yourself up as much. But kudos to everyone who does run, who finishes a marathon. But it's tough on the bod, I have to say.
The Boston Globe had the list of the thousands of folks that ran in the marathon just a few weeks back, and I was trying to pick out people from around this area. So thanks, Bob, for doing that. But anybody who ran, and whatever the time, that's just a plus. I mean, My one running story. Well, before I go to that, before I go to my one running story, as we get ready to wrap this up, I mean, it's been a fun show. It's a fun sport. What is a takeaway and one thing I would say, you guys are going to document this stuff. I mean, you guys got some great stories about your time coaching with Nike and just your personal running. I keep telling folks, this is why I do this show, so we can kind of document some of this stuff, but write a book. I'll buy a copy. I really will. I really will. But what's some takeaways from you guys? Let's start with Mike. What as far as running, and if you were going to just if you were talking to your younger self again.
Yeah. Well, actually, I'm on chapter 21 of a book, Sherm. And
Excellent.
Steve has yet to review the chapter I wrote about him and Nike. So Steve, you have to get to that.
Okay.
My book's called Hopkinton to Boston. And it's about my wife, who grew up as a runner, grew up in Hopkinton, and everyone around her has run Boston, and she hasn't. And she gets to the age of 50 and says, I have to run Boston, even though I've had 2 knee operations and 2 kids and everything. And it's a whole story of all her running life and my running life and how we melded together. And I think the thing about running is that it becomes a passionate thing that changes you as a person, that running makes you a better person. And I know in all sports there are things that you could say, soccer makes you a better person, or football, or teamwork makes you a better person. But I think that people overall, when they become a runner, it brings back some of their humanity, that they appreciate the outdoors better. They appreciate their friends better. They have runner friends. Everybody I know that's a runner has a group of people that are runner friends, and you go on a long run together, and it's almost like free therapy. You just let stuff out that you'd never tell somebody. So there's this catharsis that you have in becoming a runner that you don't know is going to happen to you till it happens. And to me, it's become a lifestyle. And Steve, I'm so thrilled that you're back running again. Steve and I've been running since 1969. So every year I say, well, this may be my last year running. And I now run every other day just so I can run more years. I could run every day if I wanted to, but I know at some point it'd catch up with me. So I bike and I run. And that way I still get to enjoy running. And but I think that, this world needs more runners. And that's what I want to leave you with.
Yeah. And when you publish that book, reserve a copy for me, okay? And if you want somebody to do the audiobook, hey.
Yeah.
Steve, what about you? What about you? You've got a lot of things that you've done over the years, including your time in broadcasting. That's another show we have to do.
Well, we should do that sometimes. I love the Facebook page, the old New England radio stations. But anyway, that's another issue. As far as running is concerned, yeah, I'm also writing a book, but it's actually just to my son, because I'm a late in life first time dad, so I don't know if anyone else would ever read it. It's sort of just about life in general, but obviously running is a big part of it. We hear about runners high, and I can just tell any aspiring runner that that's actually a real thing. There's a chemical element to it, there's a psychological element to it, but it's really one of the things that has always kept me in the sport. There is that point in running where you just feel like you could run forever, and you feel lighter than air. There's other parts of running where you don't feel so good, but it really is real. It's just very satisfying. It's not for everybody, but I would say it's for most people, especially if you don't have time for other sports, or you don't have inclination or abilities in other sports. Running is great, and running is a part of any sport anyway. And I never appreciated running more than the times I couldn't run, which I had foot surgery recently, and I had to get used to the indoor cross trainer, which isn't too bad. I can't do a treadmill, I can't do an exercise bike, but the indoor elliptical trainer isn't bad. But running is a great way to commune with nature as well as friends. Sometimes I like to run alone, and I'm so slow now. Most people want to go ahead of me anyway. But as Mike said, there's a lot of camaraderie, and it's just a great sport, and it's very fulfilling, and I'd recommend it. But
I love the fact you're doing a book,
yeah,
specifically to document things for your son, and I know he'll appreciate it. He will. And now, Bob, you're a young guy. You've got plenty of life ahead of you. If you have time, are you encouraged to write a book about running, and what would you put in it?
I don't know. I don't know about that, but maybe sometime in the future. But I think what I would end with is, running is one of those sports where there are some technical aspects, but it really is, you're going to get whatever you put into it. So, if you're not gifted at basketball or football or, can swing a bat, I've seen some really fast runners with horrible running form. And it really is just, you can put effort into it and you're going to get results out. So it can be whatever you want it to be. And, I think it's definitely a great way to connect with nature. And, I'm doing a lot of biking now and kind of, you can go for a joyride in your car or something, but when you can run, 13 plus miles and you can see so much, you can run to other towns and you get back to your house and you really feel like you accomplished something similar with a long bike ride. So great way to really, really see things as you're going through a trail or running along the coast of New Hampshire. So we live in a really good area to be a runner as well. So
Bob, your virtual background, by the way, is the old Academy Cage. I don't know if the
yeah,
guys know.
everyone probably maybe
Know that place.
2012, if they did indoor track at Exeter High School, PEA was nice enough to let us use their cage. It was a dirt floor, so you're breathing in a lot of dust. And then this elevated curved wooden baseball or basketball type track, floor track that was suspended. So good times running in there and great times cross country. I'd say that the best thing we did in cross country, and I think this tradition still lives, is in the preseason, you're doing some longer runs, but they drop you off with a bus anywhere you want along the coast and everybody finishes together down in Hampton Beach. So you got people from Odiorn, maybe they start at Genesee or maybe they start at Northampton Beach, but everybody finishes at Hampton Beach and the Atlantic Ocean is the perfect ice bath at the end of the long run. So I think that tradition still lives on at Exeter High School.
There you go. Well,
He was talking about the smell of a shoe factory being something I'll always remember, but the smell of the cage was something I'll always remember. It wasn't an unpleasant smell. It just had a certain musty odor to it, which was, you just when you smell that, you think of the experiences that you had in there. It was a great place. And of course, the new facility is a whole nother world. That's beautiful over there. So.
I'll end with one funny story in the cage is we always had either an outdoor track, an indoor track. We had one meet against PEA. So it was, Exeter versus Exeter. And the distance teams and the throwers from both teams would always make a joint 4x4, 4x100 team. So you got, me, a slow distance kid, handing off to, a big, huge guy, 250 pound, javelin thrower. And we'd be sprinting in those 90-degree corners in the cage. And that was very interesting.
Well, I wish I had a good running story. I was never coordinated enough in sports and I always felt awkward. And now that I'm an old man, I got 2 artificial knees and I have to wear my beast heavy duty running shoes just to basically keep going. But way back in the 70s, 1978, summer of 78, never forget it. I was at the New Hampshire State Police Academy, and one of the requirements to graduate from the academy is you had to make a mile run. And I don't remember what the time they set for us, but it was pretty open. I mean, pretty easy, but for some of us, some of us that hadn't been running, but in particular, I remember I had said, gee, I need a pair of running shoes. And what I wound up getting was, and goes back to, we were talking about the Lakers. Before he became Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, he was Lou Alcindor, and it was a pair of canvas Lou Alcindor sneakers, not running shoes, sneakers, flat bottom ones. Believe me, you could hear me running, flop, 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 all the way down Loudon Road and back. But I passed. That's all that mattered. I passed, and the rest is a story for the book. Anyway,
I heard that 1 mile standard isn't all that easy, but I don't know what it is. So the fact that you did it is pretty.
Hey, believe me, it was me and a guy named Mike Daly. We were the tail gunners, but we made it. That's all that mattered.
Great.
And we survived to talk about it. Gentlemen, this has been a great show, and I want to do it again somewhere down the line because it's fun and people really jumped on the last one we did. I want to let people know that our Seacoast Sports Forum YouTube page, we're tinkering with it so you can catch up with all the videos of the program. You can check out the LOCO Sports Forum podcast, all the major platforms, Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, TuneIn, and our home base, which is Podbean. Make sure you subscribe when you're on YouTube or on the podcast site so you can get notice for all the upcoming presentations. If you have any questions or comments, they're always welcome. LOCO Sports Forum at yahoo.com. So I guess that wraps it up. I want to thank again our special guest today, an old friend, Steve Burris, and a classmate and old friend of mine, Mike St. Laurent, the CEO of LOCO Sports. And for our co-host today and our production whiz for this program, Bob Glowacky, Sherm Chester, inviting you to join us on the next edition of the LOCO Sports Forum. Be sure to subscribe to Exeter TV on YouTube and hit the bell to get notified about new episodes of the LOCO Sports Forum and other local content. Follow the Sports Forum team behind the scenes on our Facebook and Twitter pages, and send us your game footage and photos to our email. That's LOCOsportsforum.extv@gmail.com. This is Sherm Chester inviting you to join us for the next edition of the LOCO Sports Forum.